Whatever time you're born into, if you're a bus or train fan, the world is a fascinating place, especially in the northwest of England. In the early 1960s, I was 11. I was accustomed to the stately progress of Crosville low-deckers, or being thrown about riding inside speeding Leyland tiger cubs on the winding way to Macclesfield. On one occasion, the last service bus to home left before booked time, and my mum complained at the office. Well, she wasn't a woman to be parried with, so we got a special bus, just for us. It was an elderly Bristol L5G, and I'll wager that it had never moved so fast in all its life. So, after the civilised shrubbery of Cheshire, when we moved to Stalybridge, it was a bit of a shock. Mills and chimneys as far as you could see. It was like going back in time, but in a good way. There were still trolleybuses whirring about in those days, but for some stupid reason, I was immune to their charms. On my first morning at school, I was surprised to be travelling on a seemingly ancient old green Daimler bus. It was showing the number 4 that I'd been told to look out for. It said SHMD on the side. I picked it up at a stop called the Guidepost near my home, although as I became more blasé, I would walk down Acres Lane into the centre of Stalybridge and wait there with my new mates. But that Daimler, it had wooden slatted floors and a bell rope that ran inside the handrails on the lower deck, giving a feeble tink in the driver's cab. Upstairs there was no bell, and the conductor had to stamp twice on the floor above the cab to tell the driver to stop, something that my school friends often imitated, resulting in confusion and an angry conductor. Pretty soon, though, I came to appreciate the Daimlers. They belonged to SHMD, the Stalybridge, Hyde, Mossley and Duckenfield Joint Board. Quite a mouthful compared to Crosville. The ones I was initially familiar with were CVD6s with Northern Counties bodies, like this one in the bus station in Stalybridge. I was on my own with my appreciation of buses. I had plenty of train spotting pals, but bus spotting was akin to lycanthropy or halitosis, a sign of creeping insanity according to my mates, so I had to keep it on the down low. On one occasion, while walking home up Mottram Road, a Daimler came woofing down the hill in low gear. Probably the brakes weren't a strong point. I think it was on the number 6 service from Glossop. But the striking thing about it was that it had been overhauled, and the undercarriage was all bright silver. I drank the sight in, while trying to look nonchalant in front of my cool mates. More about the number 6 later. I've always been one of those people who are invisible, which has stood me in good stead when exploring loco depots or bus garages. I'm sorry to say that when I was 14, I used this superpower for evil ends, because I dodged my fare whenever I could. My parents had an allowance for my bus fares, which was grudgingly handed down to me, so anything I could keep back was free money. Invariably, the conductors would pass me over as if I didn't exist. I was very lucky that I was never caught by one of the travelling inspectors. That would have been difficult to get out of. This criminal exploit meant that I saved the princely sum of 8 old pence a day, enough to buy something tasty at the tuck shop at school. Back then, there was a good model shop in nearby Ashton, so on Saturdays I would take a ride on the 11, which would lay over at the top of Stocks Lane, not far from my house. This was my first introduction to the delights of Ashton Corporation buses, and I was more than a little smitten. I boarded a spotless blue and cream, row-bodied Leyland PD2 as it sat in the sunshine under the trees, engine ticking as it cooled down. The driver and conductor were outside, leaning on the mudguard smoking. The route took us through the default dark satanic mills and chimneys, but everything seemed brighter for travelling on this bus. Later I found out that the route was shared with SHMD, and I was not impressed one Saturday to find a green tin-fronted CVG6 with a grumpy conductor waiting for me on one occasion. For some reason I found that the rear entrance CVG6s were slightly feeble-looking with their tin fronts, yet the longer front door versions were somehow more butch and purposeful. Just my teenage mind, I suppose. One thing I remember from those days is the notice directly in front of the driver's position in the cab. "This bus not to be driven under Blackrock Arch, Herod." I often wondered where that was, and what awful disaster had caused that notice to be placed there. SHMD had some single-deckers like this one for that route. As I grew older, inevitably, I discovered girls, and got to know several who went to a school called Harrytown Convent. Their school bus went past our stop in Stalybridge, and it was quite the thing to leap on the rear platform as it slowed past with the traffic. It rarely stopped at our fare stage. On one occasion I ran for it and hung on to the rear platform, nonchalantly catching the eye of one of my friends on board. The bus accelerated and I was flung off, skidding for a good few yards on my briefcase. It could have ended very badly. The conductor got off and gave me a stern talking to, but all I could hear was the laughter from the girls on the bus. I had to spend the entire day in school with torn and blood-soaked trousers. I heard that laughter all day, and I lost all interest in the Harrytown bus after that. One astonishing thing about school was that our geography master, Mr. Greenway, had a PSV licence and would drive the coach when we went along on an outing to Malham Cove or John Summers Steelworks, etc. He was a fine teacher and a nice guy. Well, he was a bus fan, so what was not to like? The coaches were always from Bullock's at Cheadle, and were usually duple-bodied Bedford VALs in their fine burgundy and white livery. At 4:45, when school ended, there was always a line of SHMD buses outside waiting. My number 4 was often a real curiosity, an Atkinson, number 70, with a striking Knight's Head motif on the radiator. It was obviously almost in retirement, as it always made a big fuss of any hill. On other occasions in the mid-60s there would be pea supers, thick fogs, where the bus would crawl along towards Stalybridge at 5 miles an hour. The Atkinson seemed quite happy about this, guided by blazing oil cans at the junctions, which could only have added to the Stygian fug. My mates and I often went to Stockport to try and bunk Edgeley Depot. The train from Stalybridge was very convenient, but I was seduced by the thought of travelling on one of Stockport's slightly exotic PD2s on the 30 service. With Leyland bodies they looked different, classy even. The twin radiator blinds always fascinated me. The depot for SHMD was at Thames Street in Stalybridge. It had an outdoor yard as well as a covered shed. The yard was somewhere that you could look around so long as you weren't too conspicuous, which was not a problem for me. Sometimes the staff would even speak to you. The place was in the shadow of the mighty Victor Mill, now demolished of course. A fascinating thing was the provision of electrical heater points to warm up the radiators and the fuel for starting on winter mornings, and also warm the cabins. Very civilised. The staff called these parking places spurs, and there was an ancient single-decker slumbering there on one occasion. On my next visit, I noticed that it had gone, and the mechanic gave the sign of a knife across the throat when I asked about it. Very sad. Just before I left school, I was waiting for the bus on Acres Lane when something outlandish appeared at the junction with Market Street. Something incredibly bright and orange. Even my mates couldn't ignore it. It was one of the sweet-looking Walsall Fleet Lines, buses that I liked. But this was painted cream and day-glow orange. Phew! I soon came to really like the new Selneck scheme, although it was sad to see the loss of the Ashton livery or the northwestern colours. A few years later, I would travel on the number 6, later to become the 236 in Selneck days. SHMD buses appeared on this service quite often, but really it was the preserve of Glossop Depot's Park Royal AEC renowns. One of my favourite buses. I would travel to Art College in Manchester on the 236 and had a few adventures on board. For a week, I had a project from college to change my appearance in some way and wear this disguise every day. One of my friends made a gorilla mask, another a woolen pig's head with a felt snout. Crazy. We had to film this and catch people's reactions. I chose a woolen moustache in the style of the then popular Jason King character, fixed on with some no doubt deadly adhesive. My fellow passengers noticed this, but pretended not to see it. I normally sat next to a charming Welsh lady in the mornings. It took her 3 days to finally ask what was going on. I was getting off the bus one day when an old dame from Stalybridge told me confidentially that she thought I'd dropped a stitch. I wish I still had the photos. I moved to Manchester to a college flat share and became very familiar with the lovely Daimler Mancunians, especially beguiling in their Manchester livery. I would pick up the bus to West Didsbury at Piccadilly, which was almost always a Mancunian, and enjoy the run, once going to Northenden just for the hell of it. On Fridays I would venture back towards the east and catch the 210, again usually one of the Mancunians, to visit my girlfriend in Hyde. My nemesis was a bus, believe it or not, but it wasn't an SHMD one. I was walking in Piccadilly, very preoccupied, probably about handing in my degree thesis. I crossed the road absent-mindedly and was immediately poleaxed by a tatty Manchester Metro Camel PD2, thankfully only travelling at low speed. Even now, I'm grateful for the driver's quick reflexes, and very sorry for giving him a shock. The impact of that radiator was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Unstoppable force meets art student. I lay there with a couple of broken ribs, an incredibly sore arm, and concussion, while the driver looked down at me worried. Well, it's not every bus enthusiast can claim they've been run over by a bus, is it? I just wish it had been an AEC renown. Thanks for listening to this, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos.